Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I'm answering your homeschool questions. So the question for today is, how do you prioritize topic or themes with multiple children if they are doing child-led learning? Wow, this is a really great question. So if I were just starting out homeschooling, I would have been so enthusiastic about child-led learning, and I would have completely put myself aside in the whole process, not realizing that I'm also important in the whole dynamic of the teacher-student journey, the whole homeschool journey, and I probably would have gotten burnt out and just realized that I just can't handle everything. However, now that I've been homeschooling for a little while, I've realized that there's a lot of benefit to child-led learning, and there's also a lot of benefit to keeping your priorities in mind as well, your energy levels in mind as well. Like, you need to also prioritize you in the whole process. Otherwise, you're not going to maybe make it to the end of your journey with the energy and the enthusiasm and the ability that you hope for. Okay, so I'm going to assume that some of these children are younger than 7 in this question. However, I don't know for sure. But let's just take that some of the children are less than 7 and the rest of the children are older. In my experience, this is what would happen. I do play-based learning, or just play in general, when my children are younger than about 7. We start our formal education at about 7 years old. So when my children were really little, they would just be playing, and a lot of times this would be open-ended activities, or they loved to just take everything out of the kitchen cabinets when they were toddlers. We had to just raise things up higher and higher when my boys were really little, because things would get broken and they would just climb up on things, and so we just made our life accommodating for the stage of life that they were in. So they would primarily play, which means that if I had a child who was 7, 8, or 9, they would want to play too. And to be honest, I prioritize open-ended play over academics at that age. So if it's child-led in that respect, then I think that it's pretty easy, because I think it's beneficial for everyone. Let's say that it's child-led and now it's become academic, like one child is really into nature and wants to take every single nature class out there, while the other child is just hemming and hawing while the other student is doing their work, or you're driving all over the place for classes for your other child, or you are literally doing classes at home. You're putting together some lessons, and the other children are, what are they going to do in that time? Okay, so these are really important practical aspects that we do need to consider, because I think often, at least for me, I think of the ideal of homeschooling being that we're all home together. It's a one-room schoolhouse or schoolroom, and every student is independently working, and everyone is doing great, and no one is arguing, and everyone seems to be able to do their lessons, and I'm delivering whatever lesson I need to for whatever student. That's hardly the case ever, right? Oftentimes I would have a toddler who was very disruptive, especially if I was trying to read aloud, or there would just be not enough time to get through all the lessons that we wanted to get through. So I'm going to share a little bit of what we did, and I'm also going to share a little bit of what you might be able to do as well if your circumstances are a little bit different. So for me, I always had a priority. Usually it was year-based, but it could also be lesson-based, where my focus was primarily on the academics of one of my 4 children, and it was usually the oldest one. So I would prioritize his education first. Not that I would diminish the education of the younger students, but I would set him up first and make sure that he was, taught the lessons or provided the lessons first. And I would let the youngest ones, younger than 7, always do the play. There was nothing formal about the education at that time. And then if there was a child in between 7 and my oldest, let's just say that they're a little bit older at this point, then that lesson could be one of 2 things. My oldest son, I might be doing a lesson for him where all of my children are listening. So a lot of our lessons are oral based, so I'll be reading or telling stories or just verbally giving a lesson, which means that the other students can always listen in, and a lot of times they might be playing and listening at the same time. Then when we would produce work, I would expect, say my oldest was in 5th grade and then my second one was in 1st grade, for instance. I would expect 5th grade quality work from my oldest, even if it was the same lesson that I was giving, and I would expect first grade quality work from my second child, because that was his age at the time, let's just say. So that was a way that we could at least focus on the one student in when there were more than when there could possibly be more than one lesson going on. So that would be the first lesson would be for my oldest son. Then let's just say he was busy doing his independent work, then I could focus on the second one if there was something very specific that he wanted to do. Now this is provided that we are doing these lessons at home. There were times when we had to do lessons outside of the home. Like let's say there was a time when my oldest was really into Kung Fu, and my second would kind of tag along for the classes and eventually signed up, but that was never really his thing. Later on, my second son was really into jiu-jitsu, but my third son was, he was a toddler in a stroller. And so we're not going to sit, my toddler's not going to sit for an hour for a lesson. He's a toddler. He's going to be climbing all over the place. So those are really challenging circumstances where it's maybe not exactly child-led, but these are different activities that each of the children are doing. I have to say that I minimized those activities because it was a little bit too draining for us as a family, trying to manage so many outdoor or out of the house obligations while still maintaining our homeschool obligations. So we minimized them. Maybe it was one per semester that my children would do. There were times where we just had to pick out of several different options, and maybe we just picked one that sort of overlapped with everyone's interests. If your children are at home and they are doing different lessons, that's one way that you can handle having them each do their own interests. So if it's child-led, having their own interests. What if it's child-led and it's really based on a particular way of learning? So you have auditory learners, you have visual learners, you have kinesthetic learners. That's now maybe the same lesson, but each child is absorbing the lesson in a different way. So child-led for me could be so many different things. Let's just say in this circumstance, it's the way they're actually absorbing the lesson. So this would be a great opportunity, and I've experienced this with my kids sometimes, where it's a great opportunity to do one lesson, but have it be absorbed by your students in different ways. Now this can get loud and chaotic in a classroom, so I'm sure that there are different tips and tricks when you're in a classroom setting. But for us in our home setting, I could be giving a lesson, but one of my kids really needed eye-to-eye contact to really absorb the lesson, whereas my other child didn't need eye-to-eye contact. Actually, eye contact made it worse for him and he would absorb less of the lesson. He did much better by playing Legos and just listening to the lesson, versus my other son needed eye contact to absorb the lesson. So this was one opportunity where you're giving the same lesson, one child is playing and one child you're giving the lesson to. Even if the lesson is for the other child who's playing, you're actually speaking to the one who their mode of learning is a little bit more of a personal engagement rather than tactilely playing with something while listening. Okay, let's say that your child actually needs to move through and experience a lesson. So I love the hands-on projects. I love adding art and handwork into our lessons. I feel like those are both memorable lessons and a great way to really absorb and learn the content, especially if it's skill-based. We could read all about knitting, but unless you actually knit, you're not going to be able to do that. That's one kind of obvious idea because it is skill-based. But let's say you're going through, like, say, a history topic, and you need something that's a little bit more hands-on in order to really understand that information, or at least be the motivating factor to dive into the areas that you're not so skilled at. So we all grow up with these three, actually there are more modalities of learning, but as an adult, you have to still learn in ways that are not the best for you. You learn tips and tricks along the way that allow you to absorb that information. and learn those skills, even though it's not the best way for you. So same with our kids. They're going to be learning information in different ways, but there might be one way that they just really shine at. So let's just take someone who's really into the hands-on and the experience of a lesson. Let's just take it as a history lesson. Then you might include something that's a little bit more tactile for the lesson. Like if you're doing California history and you are learning about the gold rush, and then you do like a little bit of panning for gold, and that little experience might be the anchor that that child uses to remember the rest of the information, because he has or she has this really experiential part of that lesson. So I hope this answered your question. If you have more details, or if it didn't answer the question at all, please let me know. You can leave your questions also in the comment section below. Thanks so much.